Hey everyone, welcome to our second last preseason video where we're going to be looking at the fixtures that some of the teams have starting the season and the implications that could have on which players you choose. Before we get started, please don't forget to like, subscribe. Really appreciate getting us over 300 subscribers throughout the season. Let's try to get a little more before the season begins. But without further ado, we'll get on to the video. So right away, just a couple things to note as we go through this video is the first two I'd say are pretty obvious. Attackers are more likely to score against a weak defense, and you're more likely to keep a clean sheet against a weak attack. So someone like Lautaro Martinez is going to probably find it easier to bag some goals against a team like Frosinone than trying to break down Napoli's defense. And a team like Juventus should be able to keep a clean sheet against a team like Empoli, but might find it hard to keep out players like Immobile or Giroud or players from the big teams. One thing that I didn't think used to matter so much, but I've learned that it really does, is whether a team is playing home or away, it matters at the end of the day. Um, if you have your Milan side being supported by the fans at the San Siro, it's going to be they're going to be feeding a lot more energy than if you're in the small compact stadium at Cagliari, where Cagliari is more used to playing in that environment. But one thing that I have found is that Serie A seems to favor the form of a player over the fixtures of the team. And this is something that I don't find in, for instance, Fantasy Premier League. I'd say going based on the fixtures matters a lot. But in Serie A, good players on bad teams will still be very fruitful in fantasy points. And um, and so I do find that you should really be following the form of a player sometimes more than the fixtures. Just like there have been times that a player like Rafael Leao will have three easy fixtures, but be in a slump and just not performing. So I still think fixtures matter, or else I wouldn't be doing this video in the first place. But something to keep in mind that I do find in Serie A, maybe go a little bit more with form of player over the fixtures. And lastly, the game's not played on paper. All of these games get played because any team can beat any team on a given day. Obviously, odds are different based on the strength of a team, but I saw Juve lose to Monza last year, and so on and so forth. So just because a team should beat a team doesn't mean that's the way the game's going to go, and you never know what's going to happen. Red cards will totally change the swing of a game, so on and so forth. All right. So one thing that I noticed to start off is the big teams seem to be have given the easiest start in schedule. I'd say in Serie A right now we have more of a big seven. So screw you Premier League for only having a big six. But the big teams I find are Roma, Atalanta, Napoli, Inter, AC Milan, Juventus, and Lazio. And these colors are kind of indicating probably the strength of the team that they're facing. Green meaning it should be a relatively easy matchup. Yellow, I mean, they should probably win, but or not necessarily probably win, but they're more of a mid-table team. And red means it's a harder matchup. And as you can see, we have 42 fixtures here, and only, let's see, 8 of them are red. All of the rest are either green easy fixture or a relatively okay fixture for these big teams. So that's telling you a lot that these are some easy fixtures that these big teams have to start out. And therefore, we should probably be looking to have a lot of players from the big teams in our game week 1 teams, because we don't want to have to be making a lot of changes. Off the start here, you can probably see with 4 green fixtures here, Roma has one of the best starts. Facing Salernitana and Hellas Verona right out the gates. It's a harder fixture in AC Milan, and then has Empoli, Torino, and Genoa. So that's a lot of fixtures here that can be really good. It's unfortunate Dybala won't be starting the season right away with a suspension and has a potential injury from one of the preseason games. But he'd be a good player to have in right to start. Based on some of the signings that Roma have made, especially in their midfield, it might be interesting to see who's going to be starting that midfield. And it might actually be dangerous to be picking Roma midfielders right now based on the rotation. But if you can find a solid defender that you know is going to be starting every game, so if you have space for Chris Smalling, right now in my team I have Spinazzola. He is an injury risk for sure. We'll see what kind of minutes he gets. But I'd say Roma might be pretty good for some early clean sheets in the season. And with Tammy Abraham out long term, we'll see who's starting in the attack. That could also be a good option, maybe as a third option, because you probably have two other heavy hitters already in your squad. Atalanta is the only team that has no red fixtures right in the start of their season. By the way, this is all the coloration. Like some people might see Monza as an easier game, or Sassuolo as an easier game as well. So it's all up to your interpretation too, as you see it. Some people might consider this to be 6 easier fixtures, although Fiorentina probably shouldn't be considered a green. But that's up to your interpretation as well. I should say that. The issue with Atalanta is who knows who's going to be starting where. I really don't know if anyone in that entire team is nailed on right now. We know forwards like Zapata and Mariel are always injured. Hoyland's out now. He's been transferred out to Manchester United, so he's not there. You can probably bet on like a Coop Miners or something who was on penalties a lot last year. But there's so much rotation with an Atalanta. You'd really like to make the most of this fixture run, but it could be pretty difficult just based on not knowing who's playing week in and week out. Napoli's start is pretty nice as well. A couple of yellows in there as well as Lazio, but I think you'd kind of be crazy to not start with two Napoli players at the start of the season based on their season last year. And I'd say there might not be so much differential with captaincy points this week, as it looks like Osimhen will be a pretty obvious captaincy choice game week 1 against newly promoted Frosinone, and just Osimhen being the striker that he is. Going next to Inter Milan, who has some yellow fixtures in there that could be green. AC Milan's their only really hard matchup. So if you have Lautaro Martinez in there, that could be a good pick. DiMarco or Sommer could probably get you some good clean sheets in there. Really potentially targeting that Cagliari fixture as like a Lautaro Martinez captaincy option is something to look at. Juve right now has a relatively good schedule with only Lazio as their hardest fixture. They will be favored to win in every other match. Right now, you can probably bet that Vlahovic will be a starting striker, but likely not a striker that many people have in their teams right now. Right now, you'd probably be banking on the Juve defense with either some center backs or Danilo. If you have Shenzi in your team, they should be good for hopefully some clean sheets, as Juve generally has been in the past. AC Milan and Lazio have harder fixtures compared to the previous 5 just mentioned, but they are part of kind of the big 7, so I wanted to add them in. And especially Lazio with 2 green fixtures right off the bat. Even if you wanted to have a Lazio player in for the first 2 weeks and transfer one out before Napoli and Juventus, I'd say that could be a good idea. Going back to my last video, planning out your transfers, maybe have someone like Immobile in for Lecce and Genoa, and then transferring them out for, if you've noticed, an Atalanta players nailed on for those 4 fixtures. So little things like that you could be looking at. But 2 great fixtures target for Lazio at the start, a harder back 4. AC Milan, excuse me, sorry. I think you'd want maybe like a Rafael Leao or a defender in there. These first 2 could very well be green fixtures. You're welcome to always bench them for a couple games when they go through Roma or Inter Milan, and then facing Verona and Cagliari could give you some good points as well. Something else to keep in mind is players from these 7 teams generally could even be worth starting when they're playing each other. If you have Osimhen, you're not going to bench Osimhen even though they're facing Atalanta. No, these are players that can score against any team in the league. If you had like a Frosinone striker, okay, maybe you wouldn't play them against the Napoli and just save them for when they're facing other weak teams. But generally, players you have from these 7 teams are going to be starting week in, week out, almost no matter what. especially if they're attackers. And here's some teams to avoid taking players from. These teams have probably the hardest fixtures out the gates. Multiple, what we're going to call red level fixtures, some yellows, maybe a couple of greens thrown in there. Now, when I say 100% avoid, you probably shouldn't have your focal point players playing for these teams. You could have a couple players and try to bench them for these big games, or if they're just players that are taking up space, then you have budget for players elsewhere in your team. Like obviously, and then there's some big players like you could still have. He shouldn't still be there, but let's just say he stayed on Sassuolo. Berardi could play through these red fixtures. That's okay. But otherwise, I can't really think of too many players in these teams that you'd really want anyway. But you don't necessarily want them unless you're planning on benching them a lot. Cagliari doesn't have any green fixtures to start out. They face Torino first, Inter Milan second. Bologna and Udinese could be some okay fixtures for them. Maybe they can squeak out a clean sheet somewhere in there. But then right back against Atalanta and AC Milan. 4 red fixtures in their first 6 games. Same story with Sassuolo, where they have Hellas Verona and Frosinone in the middle, but that's sandwiched between Atalanta and Napoli and Juve and Inter Milan. So again, if you had the quick sub out and sub in for players within that within those 2 games, that could be good. Again, plan out your fixtures. I think this actually lands right after when Lazio had theirs. So if you have Immobile in for week 1 and week 2, and then transfer them out if the Sassuolo strikers nailed on and been doing well for game weeks 3 and 4, and move back out after that, absolutely good planning in that sense. But just looking at the 6 fixtures as a whole, maybe not as great. And you can be thinking that same thing for Bologna, very similar story there. Have Immobile in, then bring in Arnautovic for these 2 games and go from there. So just little ideas that you can be doing to plan your fixtures as we go along. Frosinone does only have 2 of the red fixtures to start, but 1, they're a promoted team, and 2, I mean, there are some cheap starting players you can get from Frosinone, but if you have them in, I'd probably be looking to just have them on the bench to start and see where we go from there. But these are 4 teams that I'm definitely not having any that are going to be a focal point of my team starting out. And we'll see if they even feature in my squad at all. Likely not. Although I have been looking at Frosinone's keeper just because he's 4.0 mil as a bench keeper just in case my starting one misses out. Okay, but those are my top teams to be looking at and teams to 100% avoid too. There are other teams within there. Salernitana has a decent start to their schedule. I believe they have Roma to start, but after that, Udinese, Lecce, Torino, Frosinone, and Empoli. You have Fiorentina, who starts against Genoa and Lecce. So some good options there. And as a last one, I'd say Udinese could be another team to look out for, especially after looking at the Coppa Italia video yesterday. We have a couple players there that I would be looking at. And while they start out against Juve, they have Salernitana, Frosinone, and Cagliari as their next 3 fixtures after that. So a team to look out for to maybe take a couple players from as well. Other than that, though, no other teams jumping out the page with a really good fixtures for me. I'd say try to maybe stick to your top 7. Maybe take a gander at Candreva from Salernitana or players from Fiorentina or Udinese, and definitely avoid those 4 that I was looking at there. Otherwise, sorry, I just need to go back to, there we go. Otherwise here, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you for our team selection for game week 1 tomorrow as our teams get finalized. Take care. Have a good one.